You might already know that low ferritin can cause hair loss, fatigue, and headaches. But did you know it can also cause anxiety? Keep watching to discover what ferritin is, what it does in the body, and the 3 ways that low levels can trigger anxiety, panic, and overwhelm. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States. Over 260 million people suffer from anxiety worldwide. And it's not just adults. Young people have anxiety too. 30% of 13 to 18-year-olds are affected. And unfortunately, that number is only increasing. Anxiety is a complicated health condition. In medicine, we say it's multifactorial, which means it involves many different causes or factors. And while it's true that anxiety can be caused by mental and emotional triggers, for example, the loss of a loved one, online bullying, or family dysfunction, we often forget about the equally real physical causes of anxiety. I'm talking about the triggers that have nothing to do with your thoughts and feelings and everything to do with the biochemical workings of your body. In the same way that the symptoms of anxiety extend beyond the mental and emotional, the causes can too. When I experienced anxiety, my symptoms were only physical. I experienced dizziness, weakness, heart palpitations, loss of circulation to my extremities, and severe nausea. Basically, I was having panic attacks without the panic. My body was desperately trying to get my attention, to tell me that I was overstressed and undersupported. And once I finally figured out that my stress response system, or HPA axis, was the problem, I was able to recover completely. But if I had limited my understanding of the problem to what was happening between my ears, my thoughts and feelings, I'd probably still be stuck with anxiety. That's why in this video, we're going to explore an alarmingly common physical root cause of anxiety that hardly anyone talks about: low ferritin. According to a major international study, at least 2 billion people have low ferritin. The frustrating thing is, given that ferritin is the most sensitive biomarker for assessing iron stores, most doctors don't bother to check it, even when their patients have common symptoms of low ferritin. It can also be frustrating to try to increase low ferritin levels. We'll talk about best practices for that in a minute, so stick with me. But first, you need to know what ferritin is and what it does in the body. Otherwise, none of this will make any sense. Then I'll explain how low ferritin causes anxiety, okay? Ferritin is a protein that stores iron in your cells, safely transports it in the blood, and releases it when your body needs more iron. We need ferritin because, while iron is a crucial micronutrient, free iron is actually toxic to your cells, so it needs to be bound up or buffered when it's stored. That's ferritin's job, to keep a reserve of iron that's ready to go when your body needs it, without exposing your cells to harmful free iron. When you have adequate iron in your blood, but not enough ferritin, we call it latent iron depletion, or sometimes iron deficiency without anemia. So when we measure your levels of ferritin in the blood plasma, we get a sense for how much of a backup stash of iron your body has at its disposal, as opposed to only measuring iron in your blood directly, which is more common than measuring ferritin. Even if your iron blood test comes back within the normal range, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have enough reserve iron stored in ferritin to maintain all of the functions of your body that require it. For reference, I like to see optimized ferritin levels of 70 to 300 micrograms per liter for males and 70 to 150 for females, unless they have thyroid disease, in which case that bottom number goes up to a minimum of 100 micrograms per liter. So how does this cause anxiety? Well, there are 3 main ways. First, low ferritin negatively impacts something called the cortisol clearance rate, meaning that your body doesn't clear out free cortisol fast enough, causing it to build up in your bloodstream and trigger symptoms like anxiety, trouble focusing, sleep problems, and even weight gain. Cortisol is a chronic stress hormone that's made and secreted by the adrenal glands. How much cortisol you make and circulate is determined largely by the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, in response to stress. That stress could be mental or emotional. It could be a threat or a perceived threat. Or it could be a physical stressor like inflammation in your digestive tract, high blood pressure, or low ferritin levels. When the adrenal glands make cortisol, it's released into the bloodstream as free cortisol. And free cortisol levels rise and fall at different parts of the day and night. They're very integrated into your circadian rhythm or sleep-wake cycle. But free cortisol can also be interconverted to free cortisone. It's an inactivated form of cortisol. And a lot of factors impact how much free cortisol versus free cortisone your body has hanging around. And like I mentioned before, free cortisol can also be metabolized or cleared out of the body via the urine. So when we compare how much cortisol has been metabolized or cleared to the amount of free cortisol and cortisone in your body, we get the cortisol clearance rate. We can measure this crucial biomarker via an at-home urine test called the Dutch test. And just so you know, this is a really exciting brand new measurement for the Dutch report as of this year. And I can tell you from experience that it's a huge value add when it comes to getting at the root cause of cortisol dysfunction. But you're not going to get your cortisol clearance rate from a blood or saliva cortisol test because in order to calculate it, you need to know more than free cortisol levels. You need to also know your metabolized cortisol levels and free cortisone levels. Back to the clearance rate. If the slider bar is further to the right, it means cortisol clearance is happening faster. If it's further to the left, it means the clearance rate is lower or happening more slowly. This is what we see when ferritin is low, a slower cortisol clearance rate. Other things that cause a slow cortisol clearance rate are hypothyroidism, liver disease, and mitochondrial dysfunction. What does this mean for free cortisol levels? Well, if cortisol isn't being metabolized or cleared fast enough because of low iron stores, you may see higher free cortisol levels, which can then trigger high cortisol symptoms, including anxiety, sleep problems, and irritability. Even if your total cortisol production isn't too high, low ferritin can slow down your clearance rate, and you can still have the symptoms of too much cortisol production due to free cortisol levels being elevated. This is one of the reasons that I recommend the Dutch test for getting to the root of anxiety. The good news is that we help people all over the world get access to the Dutch test for cortisol and other hormones too, and I'll even help you interpret your results. I'll put more info in the video description so you can get your Dutch test ordered ASAP. The second way that low ferritin triggers anxiety is by causing low thyroid function, specifically poor thyroid conversion. To understand how, you need to know a bit about how your body makes and regulates active thyroid hormone. When your brain receives a signal from your body that it needs to tweak your metabolism, it sends a hormone messenger called thyrotropin-releasing hormone, or TRH, to your pituitary gland. You might remember from high school biology class that the pituitary is known as the master gland because it makes so many different hormones that regulate all kinds of functions in your body. One of these pituitary hormones is called thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. If this hormone sounds familiar, it's because TSH is the standard screening test for thyroid function in conventional medicine. It doesn't measure actual thyroid hormone, but rather an intermediary in the process of thyroid function. Here's a good way to think about it. TSH measures how hungry or needy your brain is for more thyroid activity. When your pituitary starts cranking out TSH, it tells your thyroid gland to start making thyroxine, T4, as well as a little triiodothyronine, T3. T4, which represents 80% of your thyroid gland output, is inactive. Only once T4 is turned into T3 can it bind to regulation sites called receptors on your cells and make that metabolic magic happen. Here's where ferritin comes in. Iron is crucial for the conversion of inactive T4 to active T3. This means that even if your thyroid is cranking out plenty of T4, you could still be suffering the effects of poor thyroid function because your T3 is lower than optimal. While most people associate fatigue and depression with low thyroid function, anxiety is also a really common symptom. Additionally, low ferritin can cause too much reverse T3 to be made, which can block the binding of active T3 to the thyroid receptors on your cells. And if active T3 can't bind to your thyroid receptors on the cell, it can't communicate the messages needed to regulate your metabolism. It also means that even if you're taking levothyroxine, thyroid medication, to raise your hormone levels, it might not be addressing your symptoms because it's being blocked by reverse T3. One study found that in women who still had symptoms of hypothyroidism, even though they were taking thyroid medication, over 60% of them were able to eliminate their symptoms, like anxiety, when they got their ferritin levels over 100 nanograms per liter. For a complex health problem like anxiety, those are really impressive results. The third way that low ferritin triggers anxiety is more subtle, but equally important. Think about some of the symptoms of low ferritin for a minute. Things like heart palpitations and dizziness. Let's say that a person without a history of anxiety suddenly started experiencing these symptoms. Their heart is skipping a beat or seems to be pounding in their chest, and they feel lightheaded or like they're going to pass out. Sounds scary, right? Perhaps even anxiety-inducing? You can probably see where I'm going with this, right? The symptoms of low ferritin can themselves cause anxiety. Extreme fatigue, shortness of breath, weakness. You can't really blame a person for feeling like something is very wrong when symptoms like these start up. And because most doctors don't test ferritin, folks with low ferritin are often told that their symptoms are just stress or all in their head. And that can also trigger anxiety, not to mention make it harder for them to find root cause solutions. It can very easily turn into a vicious cycle. So now that you know what ferritin is and how it causes anxiety, what can you do about it? Well, the first step is to measure your ferritin. Sometimes your doctor will run this blood test for you, but if not, you may be able to order it yourself through my website. I'll put a link to this resource in the video description for you. If you're wondering how your cortisol clearance rate is influencing your anxiety, consider a Dutch cortisol test. We ship these at-home test kits all over the world, so be sure to check the video description for that link as well. As for how to fix your stubborn, suboptimal ferritin levels, well, I've got a video for that. It's called How to Raise Your Ferritin Levels Naturally, and as of this recording, almost 200,000 people have watched it, and over 10,000 people have downloaded my free ferritin boosting checklist. I'll put a link to the checklist in the video description as well in case you want to skip right to it. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this content helpful, please consider hitting that thumbs up button and subscribing to my channel. And be sure to check out the video description for the links to those resources. I think you'll find them really useful. That about wraps it up for now. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.